Hi everybody. It's been a while. Welcome back to Podspell. My name is Shea, and I'm here with Emily Richmond. We're two badass chicas who are
Yeah.
gonna talk to you a little bit about our experience in the theater and our experience with feeling shame.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Shame in theater.
There's nothing
Two
more
things I
common.
was introduced to in my teens.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I remember the first time I felt shame was I was really proud of these cowboy boots in kindergarten.
Oh, God.
They're bright, they're red, and they're delicious. And some of the
Hmm.
kids were like, "What are you wearing?" And I'm like,
Oh.
"Cowboy boots, obviously." And they're like, "Why?" And then immediately I was like, "Shame."
Okay. I know. I was just realizing, I'm like, who am I kidding? I got introduced to shame way before my teens.
It's like, wow, you're lucky.
No.
You are living the American dream if you don't
I'm
feel
like,
shame into your teens.
what's my first memory? Probably full of shame.
What is your earliest memory?
Ever?
Yeah.
Ooh. That's a good question. Maybe, oh, man. I have some real weird, nebulous memories of the first house that I grew up in. I just remember that there was a lot of like wood paneling because it was probably built in the 70s.
Okay.
But like first distinct memories are like when we went to Disneyland when I was 8 years old. Being on an airplane for the first time, I remember it being really cool. My first memories of shame, however, were shortly after that, when I was probably about 9 and I played Little League. And we weren't allowed to leave our uniform untucked, and I had this little fat belly, and I just didn't want to tuck in my shirt because I felt super self-conscious. And I just knew, I actually just wrote like a thing about this, no joke, about how I didn't know that fat athletes existed because I never saw any.
Wow.
And even though throughout my life I was doing quote unquote athletic things, I didn't consider them athletic because fat people couldn't be athletes, because that was like the narrative that I knew.
Oh, wow.
And so even though when I was like this little league, this has nothing to do with theater, but when I was this little league player, I was being athletic. It didn't occur to me that I was. It was just, I was like, I don't want people seeing my fat body running around.
Yeah.
And I hated tucking in my uniform shirt, but I liked playing. That's like my first like shameful memory, I think.
Wow, that's like full experience.
I know.
Yeah.
So welcome to
Welcome
Podspell.
to
And
Podspell. Talking about shame.
yeah.
I think mine was actually an athletic shame as well. I remember like there's pictures of it too, which is like shame evidence forever. I was a little boy in cowboy boots
Mm-hmm.
theme, but I went to two of my cousins did like rodeo. They're like rodeo
Nice.
goddesses. Like
Yeah.
they're just like really good
Queens
at
are
it.
called rodeo queens. Okay.
Well, yeah, but they don't have like bedazzled, but they're
Oh.
pretty cool. But like they did that, and I was really young, and I was like, oh, well, maybe. So they're like, well, as a little boy, like I would do it, or no, I didn't. I did this one event poorly one time. It was like a hobby horse race. I didn't want to do it, and I remember like crying and being really upset, and my dad being like, you need to do it. No, just go. I'm just being so frustrated, and my family all being like, oh god, this is not going well.
Oh no.
And then like most of my athletic like departures as a child, I think, ended with me being like, I just don't want to, and then crying and feeling bad. Like when I quit karate, I was like, I just don't like this.
Just
and
don't
then I
like
cried.
this.
And
Yeah.
everyone was like, we spent money on it. And I'm like, why? I don't like it.
I never asked for this.
So I guess now with shame in the arts.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Let's do that.
No, that's
good.
I think it's a good intro. We're both just shameful people.
Most of the world is full of shame.
Yeah.
Like I will tell you this in my work. I see.
So in the theater and in arts, like a lot of our work is like connection and intimacy and vulnerability, but yet in my experience, there's always like a shame element to how it's either taught to us or how the leadership is built, or in the idea of doing something right or wrong, even though that doesn't really exist in the arts in a big way, like. There in ballet, there's technique, and in theater, there's skill, and there's all these different things that go into building something. But then there's almost like a little shame shadow that comes with all of us.
Yeah.
And especially how we absorb it initially.
That's so interesting, because the initial thing that I think of when you bring that up is archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Because so like I am, for folks listening, I'm a fat woman, like an obese woman. I have a very fat body, and I have had a fat body my whole life, and I definitely long for traditional, quote unquote, ingenue roles because I don't ever get an opportunity to play them. Now, having said that, when I was younger in high school and college and stuff, I did get to play some cool character roles, so I'm not begrudging that because it was a really great introduction into character work and I developed a lot as an actor. But I will tell you, when you talk about that, like this shadow or this element of shame in the arts, it's like theater became this place where I could be myself. I felt included in like this big pack of weirdos, but I clearly knew my spot. And I think that's the shame element like that comes up for me when you're talking about that, is there are certain people who are still allowed to be party, but like your role, like literally your role, right? Archetypes on stage. And so what ends up happening, because we don't have representation of full characters, full people, we get the shame comes in the form of, how am I trying to put, so I think the shame comes in the form of like, here are like love stories, for example, right? Or heroic stories. Here's what heroes and lovers look like. If you are a person that doesn't look like that, you cannot be a hero or a lover, right? Because the arts are supposed to be, or at least started out, right, as this mirror, right? This place to reflect ourselves. If we don't see ourselves reflected, what are we to believe about ourselves? And it goes around to like the fat athlete thing I was talking about. I didn't even know fat athletes existed until like I was 30 years old, because Cheryl Hayworth, I saw her in this book, and she's this huge, powerful Olympic weightlifter. She's incredible. I had never even seen that. Like, I didn't even know that you could be athletic and fat, especially as a fat woman, because it just has never been represented, right? So that to me is where the shame, like when I think about shame in theater.
Yeah, especially when you talk about like what will look like, or this is a love interest, this is that. Even as a boy doing theater, I always knew eventually I would, because I was like, oh, I could just age into it. So even as a boy, like in high school, I read Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Not necessarily a love story,
right? Okay.
But George is a main character. He's dealing with these things, and the focus is on him and Martha. And I went, oh, he kind of looks like me now. He's like big. He's a man. He has all these things. He's like, oh, well, I can just age into that. So I'll play, the funny side person, or I'll be the bad guy, or I'll be the person because I'm so large. I'm such a tall, big person. And I was like, oh, but then when I'm an older person, like in my 40s, 50s, 60s, then I can play those leads.
Then I can play those parts, yeah.
But I feel like as a woman, you probably don't have that. I mean, you have like what, Mama Rose,
right? Sure. Okay.
But who's in love with Mama Rose?
Yeah, that is interesting. Because even I think there's a little more availability for older women, but even then, like fat women are just not on stage a lot unless it's a, comedic. Sort of role, or like comedy, or
a play about obesity.
You're like, okay, fat pig. Someone's doing fat pig, like you're gonna get a part. But even then, like,
a charming part though.
I know, it's like so specific, right? And so that just comes up for me. I think a lot of shame. I don't know if shame plays a part there, I guess, and how it was like I learned who I was through theater, and not necessarily in a good way. I've had to unlearn a lot of that, and push through that shame. But, that's.
Do you think like your first introduction to the arts and learning your role in the arts, how has that affected you as an artist up until this point?
Oh, I will say probably one of the reasons I started going in the direction of directing more than acting, although I love both of them, is that I just sort of felt like my opportunities would be greater as a director, because I just accepted that my roles in performance were really limited. And so I think it's impacted me in a huge way, because I think a lot of the roles that I read for women, that I just have this knowledge that I wouldn't get cast as by many directors because of my body. Honestly, I think I just don't have the guts for that rejection, which, is maybe a shameful thing that I'm admitting. Professional working actresses just astound me in their I'm not going to use the word bravery. That's not correct, but just in their perseverance, I think. I just, it's hard work, and especially fat-bodied actresses. I think it's just hard. I can't imagine the amount of rejection that you continually have to go through.
Mhm.
So I think I moved more towards directing because I just was like, I just don't want to play witches and grandmas and
Yeah.
all
In your
that
20s and
stuff.
30s, you
You know
know?
what I mean? Yeah. And so I think it did impact me. And now I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I love the directing work that I do. I love it. Um, but I think it did impact me in that I would have probably pursued more performance, more acting.
Mhm. Yeah, I think about that too, because when I was studying acting at the undergraduate level, we talked a lot about our type.
Yeah.
And so we had a whole like week of classes where this was in my classical acting class. We had talked about like each other, where we would stand up and they'd go, okay, what's their type? What's their age range?
Oh, wow.
And it was a really
That like
eye-opening.
gives me anxiety to hear you
Yeah,
say that.
it was very anxiety inducing. It was helpful in a way because I guess I had always viewed myself as like the funny sidekick, or I'd had this sort of thing, especially because I've always been big and I've always been tall and I've always kind of had this inclination to kind of play like the sarcastic like person or like the bully. Or
Sure.
but then some of them were like, oh, like maybe like 20 to 20, maybe 20 to 30, and like maybe either a jock or maybe either like, and kind of like giving me options. And I was like, oh, and it was less about my appearance and more about like, oh, I could see you doing this.
The
But then,
energy kind of that you
yeah,
presented. Okay.
but when we got to like some of my female counterparts, then it was like a different conversation. And it was kind of weird because the class was primarily women,
Right.
and like I'm up in the gay, and so I felt like, oh well, I want to play gay characters, but I don't act as much because I would rather play a queer character than a
Mm-hmm.
straight character, because I don't want to get cooties. But but I remember when we got to my female colleagues, it was like, oh well, you're kind of short, and oh maybe if you like wore a different outfit, then you would open yourself up to another kind of thing. Or oh maybe like 25 to 40, like not all of them, like,
Right.
but every once in a while I'd be like, oh, that took a turn for this person.
Right.
Especially because like at my school, we they still do a lot of like primarily female playwrights. They do a lot of diverse works, and they even just did a play called Real Women Have Curves.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's about like bigger bodied women of color.
Mhm.
And but just being in that classroom and being like, oh, we're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looked at the same. Because
Yeah.
I feel like, especially now that I'm a little bit older, I feel like I could walk into a room and like sling it and maybe be viable for a part that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And that class didn't really deter me from that. But I know a lot of people, not directly because of that class, but that aren't pursuing performance,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of doing other things. And I always wonder, like, if those conversations continued outside of the classroom and how that affected them in their work, because they were like brilliant, but they're not around.
Right. So it's so interesting that you say this because fairly recently, a group of my friends and I that are really wanting to see more modern works kind of done, and we don't really have any theater companies around here that really produce those very much. We have started kind of talking about, hey, wonder if we could like mount our own production, just like us, like just do something that we know probably nobody around here is going to do. And then also the goal of playing roles that other directors are not going to cast us in, because we just know this, right? We just know our types, which don't necessarily lend themselves to actual performance capability, right?
Yeah.
It's just visually, whatever. And I'm a comedic person. I do stand-up comedy, so I think a lot of people assume that I just only want to do comedy,
Yeah.
which I love. I think is great and fun, but it's not the only thing I want to do. So we did a little reading, just us friends, we just got together and did a reading of the script. And it's like a total like ingenue kind of role. The show is Becky Shaw. I don't know if you're familiar with Becky Shaw. So we just got together and we just did like a reading of it or whatever. And I read for like basically the lead, the main character. And it was so interesting because I had this incredible feeling, this moment of, I'm like, I have never read for things like that. I mean, there's never, like, I've read plays with these types of characters. I personally, as an actress, have never read for these kind of roles. And to be able to read through a whole show like that, it was exhilarating. And
Yeah.
we're literally just sitting around doing a reading to
Yeah, I
just
bet.
get an idea of how it is. And it was so incredible because afterwards, one of my friends who, I was reading with, we were talking later about how cool it would be if we can do this. It's kind of just a little ideas percolating for us. And he said, I want you to know, I love working with you always, but I was not prepared for what you were going to bring into that reading. And I don't want to, and he's very kind. So he's like, I don't want to sell you short and say, I didn't think you could do that, but I was really blown away by what you did. That was incredibly good work. And I was like, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about how it was appearing to others. I was just loving reading it. But what that kind of did for me is I thought, see, there it is. There's the proof, right? This is somebody who personally knows me. He knows we do theater work together all the time, like as a director and stuff. I work with him. And here he was going like, oh yeah, I literally, just because of the way that he's been trained, right, wouldn't have expected that of you. Because, and he didn't explicitly say this, but I feel like I can say it knowing him. Because his whole viewpoint has always, he's never seen women of my body type perform those types of roles. I guarantee it. He's just never seen it.
Yeah. And going back to you talking about bravery, like if I was directing Becky Shaw and I cast you, it would be brave.
Brave, yes.
If someone cast me in a part that might be unconventional, it would be bold.
Oh my God, I've never even thought of that, but you're absolutely correct.
When I think about casting choices, of like, Emily Richmond's going to play Becky Shaw in a brave performance, where it's like Shea playing, I don't know, Brutus, and Julius Caesar is bold.
Bold. Yeah, because bold implies, that's so fascinating, right? Because the word brave implies, brave implies so much. And you know what I'm thinking of right now is when people will compliment fat women who wear body conscious kind of conform, like tighter clothing, like that show their shape. They'll be like, oh my gosh, you're so brave. But the thing is that bravery insinuates, it might even be a definition, I'd have to look it up. Bravery insinuates that you're doing something up against a huge threat, right? Because who else is brave? Soldiers are brave, right? People that are going through chemotherapy are brave. And I think to myself, it's like, I literally just wore a sleeveless shirt, Karen. I'm not in danger of dying, but socially fat bodies are so reviled, amongst other things that we have talked about, right? They're so reviled that it is brave to show your body. And so it would be brave to present a fat body person in an ingenue role, in a loving love interest role, because you're up against so much, right? But bold means something different.
Yeah, bold can be almost anything. Bold can just be like, I'm doing a great job. Bold can be something of like, it's less of a risk factor almost. It becomes more of a positive spin on, there's nothing risky about casting me, but it's a cool idea that you did.
Sure.
Where brave is like
out of the box, bold.
Oh, come see Emily Richmond as Becky Shaw.
It's a brave endeavor.
It's like, okay.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I even like, I don't know if you know the musician Lizzo.
I've heard of Lizzo, but I don't know that I've heard a lot.
So she's kind of having this like renaissance right now, because she's been around.
She's like a really gorgeous, thick black woman. Yeah. Yes. Okay, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, yes. Her new song "Juice" is really popular.
Yes.
But she's like been around for a couple years. She's great music. I've seen her at Pride festivals and at clubs in California. But she's like been around, working really, just doing really great music. And now this year is kind of like the year of Lizzo, where we're starting off with "Juice" and these sold out tour that she's on, and and something she does. I follow her on Instagram. Is she almost daily, she wears like revealing clothing. She's always in lingerie, and she's twerking, and she's playing her flute, and she's just amazing and sexy and beautiful. And a lot of comments I see on her Instagram, where I primarily follow her other than her music, is like, yeah, you go, girl, you're doing such brave work. Like, and it's like, she's just like a beautiful woman wearing skimpy lingerie, and it's like,
Right.
if you follow someone else on Instagram who's doing the same thing, you're not going to be like, yeah, you go, Natalie Portman.
You're so
Not that Natalie
brave.
Portman would do that, but
Right.
you know what I mean? Like Natalie Portman wearing a bikini, or J-Lo wearing a low-cut dress
Right.
isn't brave. It's just J-Lo being J-Lo. But
Yes. Yeah.
Lizzo doing it is like,
Oh,
ooh,
how
girl,
brave.
you are
Yeah.
like, you're pushing boundaries with that booty. And it's like, in a way she is. I mean, because, I love Madonna, but Madonna in the 90s was saying nobody wants to see a fat pop star. That's why I work out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like a
Mhm.
famous quote from her. And as I think about it, I can't think of a lot of fat pop stars that are women. You know, like Sam Smith, who's lost weight. I didn't think he was that big to begin with, but
Mhm.
he's a bigger guy, and everyone's like, oh, he's queer and he's fat. You go, Sam Smith. And it's like, well, he's also an incredible vocalist and
Yeah.
songwriter. But we also can start to fixate on that, his music.
Yeah.
Where someone like Lizzo, for example, a lot of her interviews are too about her being bigger.
Mhm.
And it was like, oh, okay. Or like they become like a niche artist.
Mhm.
You know, you'll see a big bodied singer.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, what?
I know it. So talk about like I'm trying to bring this back around to shame, and I just think shame is so like enveloped. It's just enfolded in like the whole thing, right? Because I'm sitting here going like, this has literally colored my entire artistic career, my entire like career as an artist. But I will tell you something that's popped in my mind that's been like a positive impact is that as a director specifically, I am constantly aware of how I'm casting. And when I'm auditioning, I have really, really worked hard, and I think kind of, for lack of a better terms, flipped the switch in my brain. So I don't really see body archetypes anymore. I really am focused on someone's energy, like what you were saying before about in that class, and what's important for this character, right? Like vocal quality, you know, like movement, like how familiar and comfortable is somebody with their body if it's a character that needs to have a lot of body comfort, a lot of, you know, movement, ease. And I feel grateful for that because I really do feel like I'm able to make better theater by rejecting a lot of that.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to swear in your podcast?
Yeah, you said whatever you want.
Bullshit. By rejecting a lot of that bullshit, I think because of, quite frankly, the pain that it has caused me, even though I couldn't necessarily feel it so acutely at the time, but how it has modified the way I approach things as an artist. I think it's a gift. It was like this great gift in this really shitty box.
Yeah.
You know, like full of razor blades that I had to open. Because then when I got inside, I was like, oh, wait, more open-mindedness towards casting, which creates, I think, better theater for me.
Yeah, totally. I think it does too, because then you're actually looking at a real person. You're looking at a character through the lens of a person with experience and with a different perspective that might not have been offered before.
Yeah.
You know, it's very bold of you.
It's very bold of me. You know, speaking of that, like the whole Becky Shaw thing. So Becky Shaw is the name of one of the characters, but it's not the lead character, right? But the interesting thing is we had this conversation, my friends and I, about this. Like, all things being open and my body type notwithstanding and quote unquote types, I really would not be good to play Becky Shaw. Her character, I just don't have the right energy for it. And we talked about this, and I was like, no, I agree with that 100%. I would never want to play her because I just don't think I would do it justice.
Yeah.
But the main character, I felt more connected to, you know what I mean? Which was so interesting because when you actually strip those stupid visual types, you really get to the root of characters.
Yeah.
And I think shame plays a lot into that question because whether it's body type, like mine, body size, or I was thinking like, you know, I've been going to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival for years. And one of the things that I really love about it that I think I never really noticed because it seemed normal to me because I started going as a teenager, until I started directing myself in a quite frankly, primarily like very homogenized white area where I live. Is that like you go to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and this whole idea of like, oh, but do they look like they're related to each other? Doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Right? Unless there's a specific reason for a character, like I always use the example of Othello,
Mhm.
right? Othello is literally the Moor of Venice. And so there's a specific visual look of an actor that you need to
Mm.
have. Fine, that's understandable. But aside from that being specified, there is literally nothing physical, right, that should determine a character's look.
Mhm.
Um, and most of it is stuff that's to do with costuming, right?
Yeah.
Like where they fit in society or whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And that's the thing about the Oregon Shakespeare Festival that I love and other kind of professional productions I've seen sometimes is it really forces you to think about characters themselves
Yeah.
when you're not looking at like, oh, does that family
Mhm.
look like they belong together? Like the script told us they're a family.
Mhm.
We see them on stage, the lights came up, they're all in their living room. Done. I don't need any more than that.
Yeah.
And I think it creates an opportunity to tell better stories.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of audiences really would benefit from more of that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, especially because I know, I won't name them, but I know a director who, during auditions, will line people up to see what they look like next to each other. And then he kind of does like a big factor in what they all look like and what they look like together.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing about text, nothing about their skill, but like that's like a huge, huge part of his process is like looking at them all and deciding what they look like together. And
I'm chuckling because, by the way, my high school director did that every single musical audition, and so much so that my friend group started calling it the meat show. It was literally a thing that we talked about as part of auditions, like, oh, time for the meat show.
It's actually funny
Anyways,
because the guy I'm talking
continue.
about does musicals.
Oh,
So maybe it's musicals. Who knows?
I don't know.
One of my favorite plays that does deal with body and people with bigger bodies is called Man Boobs by J. Julian Christopher,
Really?
who I think is just a divine playwright. Like his work is so beautiful. And this particular play is a two-hand play about these two men who are gonna like hook up. And one of the men is kind of self-conscious about his body. He doesn't want to take his shirt off and dealing with this whole thing and it's so beautiful. And when I read it a couple years ago and this is going to tie in like the second part of like intimacy, but
Okay.
looking at like my relationship to my body
Mm-hmm.
and then like my sexuality and then seeing like because I was pretty like looking at pictures of me when I was a little boy, I was skinny, I was small, I was kind of thin, and then I started gaining weight like 5, 6, 7, 8, and then just kind of got big and then got really tall and then all this stuff happening. But the thing about that play that I never thought about was like the idea of like being vulnerable physically with people,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as an artist, of like me as a big man is a little bit different than like a big woman just because of
Sure.
societal things, but then looking at like me coming out and me experiencing like my sex life and experiencing that portion of myself, and then how like breaking through some of those shame barriers and partnering with that part of myself and partnering with that shame part of myself too, to allow myself to experience and allowing my body to express itself and allowing my
Mm-hmm.
sex to kind of become a part of my being, and then which in essence allowed my body to become a part of my life.
Yeah.
And that play was so big for me because towards the end of the show, not to ruin it, but by the end of it, the guy does take his shirt off and then they like touch each other. And it was just so soft, it's just like a very soft, gentle, beautiful moment, or at least that's how I envisioned it. And thinking like, oh yeah, I can remember the first time I let a man touch me, or the first time a man touched me, but then I can also remember the first time I like allowed myself to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
And how the difference between those two things of like having just sex and like having someone's hands on me
Yeah.
versus like opening myself up to the experience of someone touching my body.
Right.
And then how that changed my work as an artist, because after that moment and after the moments after that, where now I'm having like full body sex rather than
Right.
like the sort of like hitting the key parts, But once you have that full body experience, then I started to understand intimacy, because it wasn't just a matter of like fucking and coming. Like it was a matter of like, oh, letting someone touch me and allowing that to be a positive experience. And then so the same thing with being a director. How can I create an intimate experience with characters and allowing people to have a full body experience on stage, not necessarily sexual, you know,
Right.
don't call HR, but but how do you have a full body experience on stage in a
Yeah.
vulnerable sense and letting audience members, in a metaphorical way, touch you, and how that all connects?
Okay, so, oh man, I have so many thoughts about this. I'm gonna try to remember them all and get them all in here in a way that makes sense. So, number one thing that just came up for me just now when you were saying that is actually nothing to do with sex at all, but talk about being intimate, like with an audience,
Mhm.
like actually being intimate with an audience. So the last show that I acted in was The Tempest,
Mhm.
for our local Shakespeare company, and I was cast as Stefano, the drunken butler.
Mhm.
And my partner, who played Trinculo, is one of my close friends who I was already comfortable with, right? So I had this safety with him
Mhm.
in our scenes together. And Caliban was also played by an actress that I know, and so we had this comfort kind of in that moment. And I will tell you that on my own, right, in my own personal life, I'd been doing all of this work towards accepting my body, reconnecting to my body. Um, Pro tip, yoga is great about that. If you get a
Mhm.
size inclusive yoga instructor, yoga was essential in me reconnecting to my body that I had just pushed away for a long time. I digress. Um, so one of the things was like when I got my costume, I have these like, breeches basically made out of my own dress pants. We just like hemmed them and they looked great. And then like a tunic tucked into that and like a vest. And you could totally see the outline of both of my bellies.
Mhm.
So I have this like B-shaped belly. And let me tell you, I put that costume on at first and I was just so anxious. I mean, it just like overwhelmed me, my anxiety, because I thought I can't be on stage like this. There are very few people I allow to see the outline of my bellies, which maybe sounds like a crazy thing if you're a thin-bodied person listening to this, but as like a fat woman, it is like on my mind constantly. So the thing about intimacy that you're saying that makes sense to me is I made the decision right away. I thought, no, fuck this. I am not allowing this to screw up the performance I've been working on so hard. And now that I got my costume, I'm like freaked out. So I just tried to remind myself that as an actor, I'm bringing forth a character. And anyway, I did a bunch of work. And what ended up happening was I actually had moments on stage where the me part of me kind of disappeared because I had all this trust with my actors, my friend that I was performing with. And I was actually allowed myself to be completely seen. I opened my chest up. I really showed myself physically. And so I leaned into the character and really got away from the physical kind of what I would call act of protecting my body, like keeping my arms around me and trying to obscure parts of my body.
Yeah.
I really got away from that, and it was honestly pretty magical because it felt so free and the intimacy part I'm talking about is to allow the audience to like fully see,
Yeah.
not like my flesh, okay, I was clothed, but the shape, the actual true shape of my body, which I have spent my entire life as a person and as an artist
Yeah.
trying to obscure because I was so ashamed of it. I felt so much shame. And by like leaning into that and just going like, this character is how this character is. Like this is what they're paying for.
Yeah.
And I gave myself permission. Now, mind you, I'd done a bunch of personal work on that before, so it impacted me as an artist. But that intimate moment, it was very intimate for me, whether the audience knew that or not. The vulnerability that I was presenting and just showing my full physical body to them was powerful to me.
Yeah.
And
I think the audience does perceive those things because it's a matter of, like Uta Hagen says, the audience cannot go anywhere that you are not.
That's so true.
And so looking at, like, if you're in your body and you're able to be in this story, then they can go with you.
Yeah.
But if there even is those little blocks of, even if it's like, oh, well, I don't want to do something physical because I don't want to show this. Well, then the audience, in some way or another, will pick up on that.
Yeah.
That there's some sort of block. And so looking at, especially like when we're casting now, like that we've both kind of had this journey and a continued journey with our bodies and stuff. How do you feel about plays like Hairspray, or plays like Fat Pig? Like, is there a place for them in terms of, I guess, your work specifically, or in journeys as bigger bodied artists?
I think, okay, so personally, I think there is a place for shows that have characters that are specified to be large-bodied. I
Mm.
think there is a place for that. Where I struggle is where those characters are used as a device.
Mhm.
And well, and this, so like Hairspray, for example, is one that I have a personal attachment to Hairspray
Mm.
because one of the first fat-bodied women I ever saw in a film was Ricky Lake in Hairspray.
Mhm.
And she was beautiful and she was like fashionable for the world of the play.
Mhm.
And she was brave,
Mhm.
right? And she was bold and her hair always looked amazing. And she's in this friggin' musical just shining. So
Mhm.
of course I have a personal attachment to that. And I think there's a place for those types of roles in really representing positive,
Mhm.
powerful, even if sort of whimsical versions of fat bodies,
Yeah.
right? The representation of that, like as a young woman, I was just like, oh my God, yes, right? Like
Mhm.
that's great. The problem I think is that it tends to stop there.
Yeah.
So Fat Pig, as an example, I think I find problematic for me. At the time that it was written, I can kind of understand that it was sort of groundbreaking a little bit
Mhm.
to address the idea that men date fat women in private, that they will not date in public.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a widely held notion now. People, I think, are aware of it.
Mhm.
And so, Fat Pig, I struggle with some of the language in it because I don't think that it presents what personally I would like it to, which is at the end to say this bullshit is wrong.
Yeah.
If you want to date someone, date them. If you don't, because your friends are afraid, you need to do your work and stop being such a shithead
Mhm.
because a person's body doesn't make them shameful or not
Yeah.
shameful. So what I would say is I think if it stops there, that's the problem, right? I
Mhm.
think those can be powerful basically as like social justice pieces, right?
Mhm.
Like we're looking at a fat bodied character being specified for the purpose of the other characters learning
Mhm.
something to demonstrate something about the life experience of a fat bodied person. That's great. I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful. If that's the only reason we're specifying people are fat bodied, then that's problematic because it stops there. The other
Mhm.
thing is, we also have to have in conjunction with that fat bodied actors being cast to play various roles that have
Mhm.
nothing to do with their body
Yeah.
because their body doesn't really matter. And I think the combination of those is like raising awareness, but then you're also fixing the problem.
Mhm.
You're going to really stop needing the first one
Yeah.
because if you're actually casting in a diverse way, now you might want to still be telling individual stories, right? Like, I mean, it's not like we don't need playwrights written by not like we don't need plays written by Black playwrights, right? Or like Asian playwrights that
Mhm.
are not, racist in their portrayal of Asian characters, for example.
Mhm.
We still need those,
Yeah.
right, to tell those specific stories because that's a specific experience. We should also be seeing Asian actors playing lots of roles in lots of other kinds of shows
Mhm.
that are not specific to like a specific cultural experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I think to answer your question, I think they still have a place,
Mhm.
but we have more work to do.
Yeah, like, the reason I bring it up is because, like, I saw Fat Pig a couple years ago, and as interesting as I thought the perspective was, my problem was that it was just the other characters having to grapple with their biases and their tolerance of this woman.
Sure.
And also, she, like a lot of characters in that situation, aren't given any agency.
Yes, yeah.
So, like, at the end, it's she's leaving it up to him whether he wants to be with her or not, rather than advocating for her wants and
Hmm.
needs. And I think that is a huge part of those kinds of stories, is
Yep.
that, and that's with a lot of stories, like even if we're dealing with different cultural situations or queer situations, a lot of times the problem is there's no agency. It's
Hmm.
like, I can deal with another film about gay bashing if the character being assaulted has a point of view and agency in the story,
Sure.
rather than the story being about them being victimized and everyone else having to grapple with, well, how do I feel about that, rather than how about the person being assaulted or attacked or put on display for this teaching opportunity for everybody else. Let's see what they have to say. Let's see what their point of view is and what do
Hmm.
they want to see change. It's like when I was going through graduate school, a colleague of mine and a dear friend of mine, we were experiencing on campus a lot of like racial tensions, and her perspective as a Black woman was, I don't want to have to be responsible for your education dealing with people of color.
Right.
That's not my job.
Right.
My job isn't to help you feel better about your situation. It's what my problem is with, like, I don't know if you've ever read Clybourne Park, the Bruce Norris show.
I've heard of it, but I don't think I've read it.
It's the one where the it takes place in the same world as Raisin in the Sun, and they buy the house that they live in, and they live in Clybourne Park, and you kind of see it then and now.
Okay.
And it won a Pulitzer, and it was very...
This is sounding familiar, but I don't think I've actually read the show.
So it's a lot. I've seen it a couple times. A lot of people love it. It's on a lot of like plays you need to read before you die.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great play. But my experience with the play and my experience seeing it with my friends who are of color is I think that's another play where we're dealing with a play that's helping white people feel better about racism.
Oh, okay. Sure.
It's a very unpopular opinion, but that's how I feel. And I feel like that play is not quite like Fat Pig because the people of color in that play have agency and they do have a point of view.
Sure.
But then I feel like it was also it's praised for its challenging work and what it's done and its bravery. And I think Bruce Norris is a fabulous writer, so please don't comment below. But I just feel like our relationship to that play was like, oh, step forward.
Right.
But it's like, I feel like it was middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm no longer accepting of
middle of the
road conversations.
I think, you something you said sparked me to think like, if Fat Pig was about the main character having a full life and there were elements of fat phobia that impacted her, and then she had agency in those moments, and we did get this kind of clear reflection of the way that the world talks about and treats fat-bodied women. I think that would be a way better use of a specified fat female character. The idea that I think anything that presents a person as an archetype, as a 2D kind of thing, that's problematic, right? Yeah. Even if we're using that as like a way to expose fat phobia or transphobia or racism or, whatever. I think for me, like talking about, characters specifically written as like fat bodied characters, especially women, I want to see them be whole human beings that part of their experience in their life is fat phobia, because that's my life. My entire life is not constant fat phobia. Of course not. I have other things that happen in my life, but does it impact my life a great deal? Yeah, but it's a subtle level, right? I've never dated a man who dated me in secret and I found out that he didn't want to tell his friends about me because I was fat. Of course, I've never done that. I have, however, had men basically insinuate that I should sleep with them because I'm not going to get any better because I got a fat body. And so that's like a real thing that happens, right? But it's not like every minute of every day, in Fat Pig, for example, since we're kind of tearing that one apart, the only experiences we see of her are with him.
Yeah, and that's...
We don't really see her having a life.
Yeah, and I know that, Neil LaBute can take it. He's fine.
Yeah, he's fine.
And the play's older in his canon, so he's good. But the idea, like, one of the opening scenes where she's, like, eating secretly and gets another bite, but then even the way they kind of meet is, like, she's grateful.
Yes.
That this man will talk to her. And I'm like, in the production I saw, I was like, but she's, like, beautiful. She's bigger and she's beautiful. And even though the actor that playing her was incredible, it was like she had to play this is how I would act in this moment of feeling gratitude for this, rather than her probably true experience, which is like, we're equal players in this moment.
Sure.
I feel, that's how I've interpreted especially those scenes in that play a lot of, like, it's like, how does a full-bodied actress who has probably come to a place of being able to accept her body now have to play this moment of, like, no agency, but this idea of gratitude for her, this lover that she has. And also, like, I'm kind of interested in seeing, like, this sexual relationship with bigger bodied people that's also not fetishized. I feel
Yeah.
like
Oh my God.
that's
Yes.
something, you know, I don't want to I don't want to see a play about someone sitting on cakes, and as much as I love Brie Larson doing it in United States of Terror, like that was a
Sure.
great
Right.
experience, but I'm just so fascinated by the fact that like we can't, especially in the West, we can't get over how people look, and we can't get over
Mm-hmm.
that element of the performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if I can close my eyes and get the story, can't that be enough sometimes?
Yeah.
I mean I know we don't always have like hearing abled audience members, which we also need to
Address.
address and be involved. And I think especially as directors and how we're taught directing at any level, like there's always this element of creating a situation on stage where what looks the best rather
Mm-hmm.
than like what feels the best, what tells the best story, what tells the story from a perspective that actually has meaning rather than like focusing on my brave fat women.
Mm-hmm.
you know
You know what's interesting? You talk about like that opening scene with Fat Pig or whatever, where she's like grateful that he's talking to her. What's interesting to me about that moment is that, like, when as you're saying it, I'm realizing that I have that's a real thing.
Mhm.
That's one thing that I think Neil LaBute got really right in a way,
Mm.
because when you're a fat-bodied woman growing up, girl slash woman, the narrative is definitely that a certain type of man will not be interested in you.
Mhm.
And so you should kind of focus on the ones who will be interested in you. And the reason I say that is that so her kind of initial reaction to him doesn't seem that weird to me.
Mhm.
If he's a certain type of man,
Mm.
like physically speaking.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is because I actually experienced this very recently, even though I'm 38 years old and I've done a lot of work on my own body stuff. And I don't take weird bullshit from
Mm.
men anymore. My current partner, who I've been with for a little under a year now, is what I would call, quote, um, socially attractive.
Mm.
And what I mean by that, right, is like the social ideal,
Mm.
right? Firm, bold jawline,
Mm.
really pretty eyes,
Mm.
thin, athletic,
Yeah.
blondish hair, very masculine
Mhm.
kind of look. Literally, like on our fourth date, I told him he would probably play a hot Nazi in a World War II movie. Which, I mean, he's still with me, so apparently that wasn't a deal breaker. But my point being that, when we first matched, we matched on a dating app,
Mm.
and he seemed nice. I literally had zero expectation that it would go anywhere. I thought, we'll chat for a bit. He seems like a nice guy.
Mm.
And I know that's directly related to the fact that I had been told continually, either overtly or subtly, my entire life,
Mm.
that men who looked like him would never be interested in a woman who looked like me.
Mhm.
And so, quite honestly, I wasn't playing hard to get. I just didn't put out any vibes in the beginning because I thought, I mean, he seems nice and we get along and we see, he's friendly, but he wasn't creepy and he didn't in any way try to like move too fast.
Mhm.
And so I think these like weird messages, like as a woman, like if a dude doesn't try to bone you on the first date,
Mhm.
he's definitely not into you. Also, guys like that look like that would never be into you. I didn't really interpret it as like overtly romantic.
Mm.
We were just having all this great time together.
Yeah.
And then finally, like we had this nice hug like on our fourth or fifth date, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa, is this dude into me? Like there was just
Mhm.
something about it. And so what I want to say about that is her reaction at the beginning of that play makes sense to me, but she doesn't ever grow. By
Mm.
the end of that play, she should be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
You're the one who approached me.
Yeah.
Don't even try to act like,
Mm.
because here's the thing. We also then should be having in that play a moment to address how we really screw up straight men who are attracted to fat women,
Mm.
or just women who are fat. I shouldn't even say like
Mm.
only fat women, just
Mm.
a variety of body types. Because the men, boys and men who are hearing those messages that girls and women are hearing, they're hearing the same messages.
Mm.
So girls and women are going, oh, if I have a fat body, no one's ever going to want to fuck me.
Mm.
And men are going, oh my God, if she has a fat body, I shouldn't want to fuck her. What
Mhm.
happens if you're like, this is shameful, I'm not supposed to want to fuck her, but I really do?
Mhm.
Then if you get rejected
Mm.
or if your buddies are assholes, then it's like, okay, I'm going to turn to violence, because we also only train boys to be violent when they
Mhm.
have bad feelings, which is a completely different podcast.
Yeah.
But my point being that you just said something, and this is the danger of having me on your thing. Oh,
Yeah.
intimacy, way
Mm.
earlier. I'm probably missing the thing that you just said, but I saw a show at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival a couple seasons ago that was based on the poems of August Wilson.
Mm.
And now it's like the name is escaping me, but it was amazing. And in that show, there was this depiction of a couple, very loving and very sexual, not overtly, like not super sexualized,
Mm.
but very passionate physically together. And they were dancing. It was like this whole thing. And she's like a large black woman, and he was this very thin, kind of beanpole white dude. And that depiction, I mean, I literally like couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks.
Mm.
And actually, our mutual friend got me like a still from the production of them dancing that was signed at like an
Mm.
auction
Wow.
and framed it for me as a gift, because I'll tell you, it was like one of the first times, you know, I've seen a fat actress in an ingenue role that she was depicted as very desirable.
Mm-hmm.
And here was this man, very thin, you know, different type. And obviously as a black woman too, because like the story also was set a little bit kind of like in the 60s, 70s. So that was still, you know, a taboo kind of thing. But to see them together was just like so like
Yeah.
revelatory. I was like, oh my God, from the minute she came on stage, she was so desirable. It's like you just wanted to look at her. And he just immediately was like, I need to be talking to that woman. Then as their relationship, I need to be touching that woman. I need to be dancing with that woman. And you could just see it coming from him as an actor. And I, you know, talk about intimacy on stage. I mean, nobody took any clothes off.
Yeah.
But it was very intimate.
Yeah.
Like clearly it was intimate.
I mean, I feel that too. I think, especially as like a queer person, like, and I feel like I haven't seen a lot of progress in my adult life from a bigger queer man of like, I'm a bear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like I feel like men in my physical type sort of have to play a waiting game to see which of the pretty boys, which of the more acceptable socially attractive boys or men would choose us.
Yeah.
And I feel that especially because like a lot of apps like Grindr or even Tinder, there are ways you can cut out a certain type of guy.
Right.
So like Scruff or Grindr, you can choose to not see bears or chubs or bigger guys. You can choose not to see certain kinds of bodies in your applications. And so the ones that I can see, when I'm on these apps, it's almost like, all right, which one's willing to interact with me?
Yeah.
And even when but then you have to get into the whole thing of like, who's out, who's all that bullshit. But I remember a lot of guys that I've been with and dated and been with sexually are usually like a swimmer's body, like guys like that who tend to, that I've, you know, not by like me seeking out that kind of body.
Sure.
But I can always feel the hesitancy of like getting to a certain point in our relationship where we can have sex and we can do all kinds of fun stuff, but then it gets to a place of like, well, what's beyond this? Okay, start over. You know what I mean? And I don't see that in a lot of queer media or productions. Like, you know, like J. Julian Christopher writes about it, and I see it sometimes in different, like the show Looking. It was on HBO for 2 years, and they had a movie. Daniel Franzese was on the second season in the film. He played Damien in Mean Girls.
Okay, yeah.
He came in, and his performance was just incredible. You know, he's a bigger guy, and he dated one of the main characters who was like this like artist, like beautiful person of color, and they had like a really amazing relationship and a very sexual relationship. And I remember there's an episode where they're having sex, and it's like pretty graphic, and they're having sex, and it's really awesome. And then they finish, and he gets up, and you see his whole body.
Wow.
You see his full frontal, and he walks down the hallway. And I thought, that's the first time I've seen that, and it not be like a special moment.
Right.
And they just have this great relationship of Daniel, who's like a bigger guy, and in the show he's also HIV positive, so they have a whole thing about that. And but being able to like see his naked body on HBO and having sex with his partner.
Wow.
And being like, wow, I've never seen
that before. Yeah.
And that was really powerful for me, especially like from an actor that I love and a show that I love. And especially because the whole show is like these kind of like, good looking dudes in San Francisco, and they're all like a
Right.
certain body type. And I remember there was an episode where one of the characters has a three-way, and one of the guys in the hot tub that he's sleeping with has shoulder hair,
Mm-hmm.
has like a patch of hair on his shoulders. And I remember a lot of like queer media was like, "Oh my God, this is huge." And thinking, what?
What? Shoulder hair
It's
is
like I
huge?
have hair on my shoulder, and I thought, I guess I've never seen that either.
Yeah.
And he's like this hot like rugby player, and he had shoulder hair. And I remember in an interview with the actor was like, "Oh yeah," like it wasn't a big deal to him.
Right.
But thinking like, wow, as a society we're behind, and then when we get into like anyone not a straight white dude, and then
Mm-hmm.
when we get into like different sexualities, and then like the queer, I mean, I think the queer community as a whole, like we have, I find racism and body shaming and stuff to be like heightened in the queer community.
Oh, I think I could see that.
And I feel like because we're like, one of my favorite shows is Will and Grace. I love the
Mm-hmm.
reboot. I love what they do, but like there aren't any big people on that show.
No.
There's nobody on the, Jack's not sleeping with like a normal bodied guy or a bigger bodied guy, and Will's always fucking some hot cop, Bobby Cannavale or, something like
Right.
that.
Yes.
And one of the running jokes is Karen's husband, Stan, who we never see, is like a huge like
Yes.
dude.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, especially with the reboot, I'm like, oh, I'd love to see them be a little more subversive, because I think
Mm-hmm.
the reboot is like biting. Some of the political commentary, the
Yeah.
Me Too episode was so powerful with Grace, but then like as a show about queer representation, they aren't really tackling that, and that's
Right.
like that to me is like the show. Where if I'm gonna look to a queer society, or I'm gonna have a media representation, that's the most mainstream as it gets when it comes to like Will and Grace.
Sure.
But then you kind of have to go into like the low rated like Looking didn't have great ratings. It has a great like cult following, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
like I had to like go to a premium channel into like the gay section to like
Right.
find Daniel Franzis's
I
penis.
know.
Like it's just and it just sucks. And I don't know what needs to happen, because I think a lot of playwrights are dealing with it, and I think there's like people like us who talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then like as an art form, as storytellers, like what needs to happen? Because even shows like This Is Us, like she's an amazing
My
actor
big sigh.
as well as being a big-bodied woman.
Yeah. Oh, man, I just want to be official about my love for Chrissy Metz in case she's like listening to this. I think she's incredible. I really do think she's incredible. Also, she dresses like every time. Every time I see her at a damn award show, I'm like, why can I not have your entire closet? But my beef is never with Chrissy Metz, right? It's with the writers, obviously. She's doing an incredible job with that role. And I am part of a lot of like communities online of like fat bodied women for various things, fashion and just like fitness and health and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of differing opinions about how that show is terrible because of how they represent, lots of things. I mean, whatever. I, in general, like the show. I'm not caught up on the show, but I will say this. I was so excited in the first episode that her entire plot line, the first introduction, was just about her being fat. I fucking lost it. I thought this was our moment where we get to have a fat woman playing a character who's just like a regular old lady. She's just part of this family drama show thing that we're watching, and I was so frustrated because I thought, in the first episode, those other two main characters, they get like diverse, complicated character, like introductions. And here, our first introduction to her, she's on a scale. And it's really bothersome to me because I think what I really want to see out of This Is Us is an opportunity. So maybe it starts there, but then Kate learns to actually just accept her body and then start taking care of it. And that's the thing, is I think when our media represents the same old trite bullshit that we've always had, that includes the theater, that includes social media, that includes film and television, to me, when theater as an art form, right, is supposed to hold the mirror up to society. That's that whole, whoever said that thing, which I can't remember now, but I feel the same way about film and television and all of that. If all we do is hold up stereotypes and bullshit that keep us back, there is literally no way to move forward
Mm-hmm.
because I believe firmly that our media, our art, influences us as humans.
Yeah, it does.
You know, they say like, oh, art imitates life, whatever. No, I think that art has an opportunity to really truly change us.
Mm-hmm.
Not just on an individual level, right? But like imagine if, I don't know, just imagine if every show on television, if every main new blockbuster show had a fat character,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or a queer character, and it never once came up. They
Mm-hmm.
just happen to be a fat-bodied person, or their character happened to be queer,
Mm-hmm.
but it literally has nothing to do with them. They're part of the sitcom because they're like the uncle or the
Mm-hmm.
aunt or the whatever. It really has nothing to do with their actual character.
Yeah.
They just happen to be played by a fat actor, or the character happens to be queer,
Yeah.
and nobody ever talks about it. Maybe occasionally there's like a joke or something. Can you imagine how that would change how people viewed queer folks or fat people? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, it could make a huge difference because it literally just is becoming a non-thing.
Yeah.
So I think my beef with This Is Us as an example is not with Chrissy Metz at all, is with Kate's character and how it could be so powerful and impactful for her
Mm-hmm.
to grow, for her to reject diet culture and just be like, this has literally made me miserable. I'm in pain all the time because of my grief.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to modify my body for like the whim of society is doing nothing but like amplifying the effect of my grief.
Yeah.
Just fuck this. And I mean, that sounds crazy and radical, but let me
Mm-hmm.
tell you, I'm a very fat bodied woman and have been my entire life. And I finally just let go of that shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it has changed my life
Yeah.
as a person, as an artist, all of that, right? All that shame work that I did as a romantic partner. You
Yeah.
know, I have this partner that is incredible, incredibly loving, and we actually communicate and talk about intimacy, right? Something that my romantic relationship currently, since I was able to let go of a lot of that shit, has like really taught me as an artist is intimacy is way more than sex.
Mm.
It starts with shit that has nothing to do with sex,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Good emotional intimacy leads to good sex, not the other way around.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Like even down to the idea of foreplay, like
Yes.
foreplay is like a 24-hour thing. I feel like intimacy can be a 24-hour thing.
Yes.
Like as even, like even just a touch of the hand,
Mm-hmm.
or an idea of like being in public and like not staring at me while I eat, or like giving, like not judging me for wanting a dessert, or
Yeah.
or just things that like I think normal body people don't think about.
Mm-hmm.
But even like the fact that like having a partner that's not going to shame you for wanting to what otherwise be considered indulging.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. Like, so in that same thing I was talking about, this essay thing that I wrote about fat athletes, I talk in there about, my partner who's really, he's like outdoorsy. He likes to hike and kayak and backpack and fish and all that crap. And I never really was exposed to that, so I never really tried it. When we first got together, he expressed concern that that's not something I enjoyed. And I flat out just finally told him, I was like, how would I know if I even like that?
Mhm.
I didn't grow up doing it. Have you ever seen, I flat out asked him, I said, have you ever seen a woman with my body in an ad for hiking boots? And he like thought, and he was like, no.
Hmm.
I said, so why would I feel encouraged to go try this stuff if I wasn't introduced to it like as a kid, and nobody ever expects my body type to be doing these things? And so that's the kind of thing, right? Like having a partner who didn't question, that was like shocking to him. He just assumed I didn't like outdoorsy stuff because I had tried it and hated it. It was unfathomable to him that it was not something I was encouraged to try, because he's not fat bodied, right? Like he's got this super athletic body and he's just always grown up doing outdoorsy stuff. And so having a partner or people around you, colleagues, whatever, who don't see those limitations, who like actually look at you like a whole human being, and then really listen to you and go like, what do you want to do? What are your limitations? Because even athletically bodied people might have, they might have like chronic illness. They might have some sort of like injury, right? Or like something that limits them. That's totally possible. So like really looking at people like human beings is just so revolutionary.
Yeah.
But that in itself is a type of intimacy, right? Because if we look at every person, and then that extrapolates to characters, right? And on stage, if we look at people as actual whole human beings, and then we we're then required to respond in kind.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we expect them to be vulnerable and intimate with us and be whole human beings,
Yeah.
really look at that. If we don't offer the same of ourselves to like hold that space with them, then we're just like weird voyeuristic creeps.
Yeah.
And so I think that real intimacy, like you're saying, I agree with you, starts with just like, who is this person as a whole person, and just allowing for them to be that.
Yeah. Because like zooming in on the fat-bodied issue is like isolating it and ignoring the multiplicity of a person.
Yes, absolutely.
And then that's how we go from a three-dimensional performance, like we get on This Is Us from her.
Uh-huh.
But then when we're zeroing in on the fat issue, we're creating a one-dimensional playing space.
Yes.
And she's having to, is creating, like 3D models in a paper world. Like she's not able to take the character beyond where the the square is, or the space is. And so much of this is just like, but like also as a woman, what's your alternative? Because like me being a big bodied person and a big man, people, even though I'm heavy, I'm also 6'7", so people assume I play sports and I'm athletic.
Oh yeah.
But I'm a big bodied man and I'm an artist. And so then people always, like daily, it's like, oh, did you play football? Did you play basketball? And I'm like, no. And then they are disappointed in me.
No, but I hung out in the locker room. Hey.
Yeah, it's like, I've definitely been around those boys, but
Sure.
not in I'm with those men, but not in the way that you might appreciate. But like as a woman,
Yeah.
you don't have that alternative. Like I can be a big bodied person, but people can still assume I'm athletic.
Sure.
But like your hiking example, yeah, as a big bodied woman, what is the equivalent? Because even as an athlete, we're not automatically going to go, oh yeah, you're an athlete. Where like with me, people will look at me and think I'm an athlete.
Sure.
Even though I'm like a dump truck sometimes. You know what I mean? But it's just that different social structure.
Who isn't a dump truck sometimes, I ask you. It's a good question, and I'm really searching myself because I want to be serious and not flippant in my answer. But I think my answer is the alternative is nothing.
Yeah.
That's never assumed of me.
Mm-hmm.
No, I guess the alternative is it's always assumed until I quote prove otherwise that I'm lazy, that I quote let myself go, that I'm just not. Well, so I will tell you that same conversation with the whole outdoorsy thing. It actually started because he said, I like to have an active lifestyle and you don't. And let me tell you, I might actually tear up now. That hurt me deeply because I thought every bit of shame from childhood came back because, oh, you must be lazy. You must, again, I was playing Little League baseball, but I didn't think I was athletic.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the definition of athleticism, playing a sport, right? And so all this shame came back, and I really struggled with that for a couple of days. And then we talked about it later, and I said, I really reject your use of saying that I'm not active. I'm really busy. I do a lot. I'm active in the community. I'm constantly just like doing stuff. I barely spend any time like on my couch. And so it's hurtful to me that you say that. And he really thought about it because he's a very kind person. And he eventually said, you're right. You are very active. You're not outdoorsy. And so then he corrected himself, right? But like, I think this illustrates for me someone who actually was really into me, right? Like we'd been seeing each other for several weeks, and he said that to me, and it really hurt me because the assumption is if you're not engaging in sport visibly constantly or talking about it, or the assumption is that you just are kind of lazy. Now, I don't think that he assumed that of me.
Yeah.
The word active for him, he attached to outdoorsiness or whatever. But I think that is the alternative. The assumption for fat women is always that we are lazy, that we are not in any way active or athletic.
Yeah. And the fact that you don't have the history of having been an athlete, like I could be like, oh yeah, I did play football, and they would excuse my big body because I was an athlete. And now I can get away with whatever I want because somehow I've earned a fat body because I played sports in high school. But like women don't have that. There's no alternative or no reason, or being like, you're a mom.
Right.
But then even that, like, I know even like with women that I know that have had children, like people are always like, oh, baby weight, like, and it's like, when does it stop?
I don't, yeah,
When do women get the free pass? You know what I mean? Because like
yeah,
even thinking about like my mother, who I love and adore, like she gained weight the last couple of years because she has a severe back injury
mm-hmm,
and she cannot do physical work without
sure,
injuring her spine anymore.
yeah,
And so she, she managed it in other ways. But I remember even thinking like, yeah, what I can get a free pass for an imaginary athletic past,
right.
and
Well,
people can't. Other
even
people can't.
women, I would say even women who, let's just say would say to somebody, "Oh, well, I used to dance or something," which I cannot. No one teach me how to dance because I can't do it. But I used to dance. The assumption would be like, "Oh, she used to be an athlete. She let herself go.
Yeah,
Let herself go."
yeah.
And let me tell you, I know not personally, but in the communities I'm in, plenty of fat women who are incredible dancers. And I am jealous because I could learn the steps probably, but I don't think I have that thing in my body that dancers have.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like I tell people, like, listen, I act, I sing, I do stand-up comedy. That's it. I cannot dance. Don't
Mhm.
try to get me to do that.
So you can play the choreographer in a chorus line, but you can't be
But
in
I
the
can't actually
chorus.
be in the chorus. No. Exactly. Yeah, because I'm just not a dancer. But it's so interesting to me because when I was writing this like essay thing and it just kind of tumbled out of me, it wasn't like
Mhm.
I was trying to specifically write it for anything. It was just this thing that came to me. I was thinking of all these ways, I was cataloging like all these times in my life that I've been really athletic.
Mhm.
And it didn't occur to me, right? Because the idea, I think for women, I think what I'm coming to in this moment, thinking about it, is like, what's the alternative for fat women? The alternative is always, we used to be, and now we're something different.
Yeah, like you're taking for your present self
Yeah.
where men aren't. And I think that even plays into, well, it's just because I'm white. Like that's another thing too, because I think about like some of these men, like even Alec Baldwin, for example, who I still think is stunning,
Oh,
and
yeah.
but like he's bigger now, he's
Mm-hmm.
gained weight, but then we can always go like, oh, when he was on when he or those pictures of him shirtless when he was in his 20s, or when he's on Broadway playing Stanley, and he's just gorgeous and lean, and we
I'm
can
actually more into him now. But anyways, continue.
but we know we can reflect on that and go, yep, that's still you.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that plays for men in general, like looking at like school shooters, for example.
Oh, wow.
Well, he did this thing right now, but if you look at this,
Oh.
or the
If they're white.
if they're white, yeah, because if you look at like Trayvon Martin,
Yeah.
well, right now he's a thug. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
like he's a little boy.
Right. Right now he's a child, actually.
Yeah, not all this other stuff, but we sort of pick and choose when to take people for who they are
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Yeah.
And then, but for like women, yeah, it's always the idea of letting things go. Where men, it's like, oh, when Alec Baldwin dies, we're gonna see that shirtless picture.
Yes, we are. Absolutely, we are.
Like we're it's always gonna happen. Where like, I remember when Anna Nicole Smith passed away, we're like looking at her being crazy on her reality show, as
Mhm.
opposed to being like she was a model, a Playboy model. She's gorgeous,
Yeah.
but we're gonna focus on this. Or that woman that passed away yesterday from Who's the Boss.
Oh, yeah.
We see all of her pictures of like right now or
Mhm.
recent work, and then being like, oh, she was old.
She was old.
You know what I
But
mean?
she had a
But
whole career
yeah,
before that.
she had a whole wonderful life. But it just baffles me that.
But I think it's interesting you say that because I'm thinking that's true of women, I think, in general. Like when we get married,
Mm,
how do you describe someone? They'll say, "Oh, well, oh, I ran into Emily Richmond the other day. Well, she used to be Emily Jones."
mm,
She's still Emily Jones just because she legally changed her name when she got married, right?
mm,
But I mean, this is true across the board. Like women, they're like I could go on and on for hours about the expectations for women,
mhm,
and then of course the intersectionality of that with like fatness, like
mm,
how the expect and then of course like I have the privilege of being a white woman. So yeah, I'm a fat woman, but I'm also a white woman, and so
mm,
that gives me specific privileges that like women of color don't have.
mm,
Especially like if you think of like Asian women, like we think that white women aren't allowed to be fat.
mm,
Asian women are not. I mean, they're not allowed to have an ounce.
mm,
Like the version of like quote fat, and I'm talking like what people think of as like hugely fat women in Asian cultures. I mean, it's like a US 18.
mhm,
It's like large love handles and kind of fleshy hips, and at least in American culture, we've like come around to sort of accept that as
Mm.
like beautiful and plus size as long as you have a flat stomach
Yeah, like those
and
plus size models that are becoming famous right now, it's like they're not really that big. When you think of a lot of the
yeah,
mainstream ones, like I remember a couple years ago, this woman that was, I think she was doing a Victoria's Secret show or something, and they were like, "Oh, this plus size model, the bravery of Victoria's
she's like
Secret."
a size 12.
Yeah, and I'm like, "Oh," but then I even think of like Marilyn Monroe was a big woman. She was
Yeah, well, she was very
she was
hippie.
full figured and hippie, and it wasn't really until like the end of her career and her life where the weight loss happened. But like what
Mhm.
made her famous was her like full body.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking like, what has changed from celebrating someone like her, well, and ultimately destroying her, but
Sure. What, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, even within the communities of like fat women that I'm like part
mm,
of, we recognize that there is a certain quote plus size or body shape. Like even if you look at like plus size models, right?
mm,
They're going to have larger hips with flesh on them. They're generally going to have flat stomachs. They're going to be pretty tall. They're going to have large breasts,
mm,
maybe larger thighs, but they're still going to be very muscular and smooth. They're not going to show cellulite. I mean,
mm,
like airbrushing or whatever, but
yeah,
like still, the idea, like as a fat bodied woman myself, I would never, ever, ever be considered a plus size model ever.
mm,
And that's because the shape of my body, even though
mm,
I'm like literally who you're marketing
mm,
to buy your clothing from fat bodies,
mm,
like it's really a revolutionary thing lately that there are some smaller clothing manufacturers, designers who are using just what I would call like regular everyday people
mm,
to model their clothing. And it is like almost refreshing to tears when I
mm,
see a woman with my body
yeah,
shape and size and I go, I actually know what that's going to look like on me.
mm,
Right. And I'm way more inclined to want to buy that shit because I go, there's no question to me what that's going to look like on my body because I'm
mm,
actually seeing it. And so, there's this like weird the body positivity movement, which I'm rolling my eyes since you can't see me because this is a podcast,
mm,
um, has been co-opted,
mm,
right? By like, hey, it's okay to have some flesh on you. You don't always have to be starving yourself, but it's still not inclusive of all bodies. When I talk
mm,
about body positivity, it's
yeah,
like that's why like when I talk about it, it's more like body liberation or acceptance,
mm.
like just accepting that's the vessel that you're in.
Yeah, I feel like what, because like I do love the show My 600 Pound Life, which I'll explain, but like it's almost like we get to a certain point, you're plus size, and then you're My 600 Pound Life. Like it
Yeah.
seems like there's this gray area that people don't want to acknowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and like and then so why I love My 600 Pound Life is because that is such a dangerous extreme. Like when you
Sure.
lose your mobility, you lose feeling in your ligaments, but to see someone like that come back from that and then to find love and appreciation for their bodies, their new bodies,
Mm-hmm.
which are still big,
Sure.
but I always find that really inspiring when you see their like checkups after they've lost a lot of the weight and
Mhm.
they've learned to love their bodies, and it just took them literally being trapped inside of it
Sure.
to then go, oh, okay, this is like my vessel, this is something that I can take care of, and I always find that really moving.
It's interesting, like I talked earlier about yoga and like how it was a great tool for me to reconnect to my body. And this whole like idea of loving your body, right? This body positive, love your body.
Mm,
And the way that it's always touted is from the outside in. It's like
mm,
stand in front of a mirror with your belly exposed and rub your belly and tell your body that you love it. And the thing is that I'm calling real bullshit on that.
mm,
And here's the reason, not because it's not a cool thing. Like I friggin' rub my belly all the time.
mm,
I started doing it in a comical way towards my partner, and like he just laughs every time because he's like, "What is your face you're making?" But we should, I think, if we love our bodies, want to touch them. That's not what I'm saying is bullshit. The bullshit part about it is like telling somebody their entire life, right?
mm,
Literally just like building it into every bit of information they ever receive. Your body is definitely not attractive.
mm,
No one will desire it. It's unhealthy, no matter what you say. It's
mm,
not athletic. You will never be healthy. You'll
mm,
never have health. Your body is bad, literally. And then you're like, just stand in front of the mirror and tell yourself that's not true. Like, I'm a licensed therapist with a master's degree. That shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
It takes lots and lots of therapy. I've been
Mhm.
in therapy for probably a decade, personally myself, to do the work
Mhm.
to undo those messages.
Yeah.
However, akin to what you're saying about my 600-pound life, the thing that actually really helped me, in addition to my like fucking 10 years of therapy, was being in yoga, truly reconnecting with my body because I had just disconnected myself from it because I hated it,
Mhm.
and finding real strength.
Mhm.
Actually doing things in yoga that if you had asked me before I started yoga, like, hey, you want to do this position, this pose, I'd be like, are you insane? Because number one, the pictures of the person in the pose would likely be a thin person.
Mhm.
Now there's lots of plus size yoga instructors, Amber Carnes and Diane Bondi, and
Mhm.
incredible, people doing really, really cool stuff. But before that, I didn't have that. And so if you had showed me those poses and been like, "Hey, you wanna learn how to do this?" I would just be like, "There's no way." And the reason I would be like that is because all of the messages had
Mhm.
told me that. So we can relate this to theater since I know that's part of this podcast is why would I ever think I could play this role or
Mhm.
do this certain activity or do this kind of movement or wear this kind of costume if literally the message has been you can't. There has to be someone who tells you you can. And this is where
Mhm.
allies come in, which I want to talk about, right? Is like your friend in college going, "It is not my job to educate white people
Mhm.
on racism just because I'm a woman of color. Not my job." And I agree. No one's listening to fat bodied people about how we deserve respect and that we're actually more capable.
Yeah.
We need these allies, right? My yoga instructor, who had taken a yoga for all bodies kind of supplemental training and really just believed in the strength of bodies because she admitted to me later, she said, my mother was really large bodied, but I saw how strong she was all growing up. I never saw her limited.
Mhm.
So she welcomed me into yoga, helped me modify poses. I started noticing my body getting stronger, and here I
Mhm.
am doing poses I thought, there's no way I would have ever thought my body could do that.
Mhm.
That path led me to more of an inside out kind of love, like you're
Mhm.
saying on my 600-pound life. The capability that they had, like when they were trapped in it
Mhm.
and then had to work to get out of that, the appreciation for their
Mhm.
body and how strong and how well it could perform at
Mhm.
things. That was the thing that led me into like, oh, I love this body like I would a pet or a child, and
Mhm.
I want to take good care of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't the outside in like, oh, just look at your body and just tell you because when you have been brainwashed literally, and I
Mhm.
use that word intentionally,
Mhm.
when you have been brainwashed in whatever it is, fat bodies are bad, being queer is a sin and I'm
Mhm.
going to hell, right? I'm inherently lower class because I'm a person of color, or, this means that if I'm a Latina,
Mhm.
the only thing I'm good for is being with gangsters and like selling drugs, which is
Mhm.
like how you see Latinas depicted all the time in media, as an example, right?
Mhm.
If that's all you know, if that's what you've been brainwashed to believe culturally,
Mhm.
it's hard to do the outside in. You gotta go
Mhm.
from, like, the inside out, you know?
Yeah, and what we're seeing in both film and theater of you become better when you become skinny.
Yeah,
You
ugh,
you know,
yes.
and that's the thing about like why I love a 600 pound life and why I like a play like Man Boobs, which was really poignant to
Mhm,
me, was that whether you lose the weight or not, it's about your accepting yourself and you
mhm.
owning who you are and then making the changes you want to see happen and
Yeah,
engaging in those and making it happen. And I feel that's especially really needed at a mainstream level theatrically. It's like when I go to New York and see shows, I'm not seeing big people.
no.
It's just not happening. And I think there are supremely talented actors that are working at any level, but it's like I'm not seeing big people in roles other than like playing Tracy in Hairspray. Like you
Mhm.
just don't see it. And it's like I'm bigger and I know I can sling it. I know you
Sure.
can do the same thing. It's like, but that training of someone's going to look at me and write me off.
Mhm.
So why would I go for it?
Right, like the constant rejection, right? I
Mhm.
go back to that, it's like,
And the
it's
thing
just
is
so
that
much work.
and the constant rejection is happening without the actual rejection.
Exactly,
We've
yes.
rejected ourselves before we've gone into the room
Yeah.
to audition. We've rejected it before we've done it. And I think I just get so fed up with it. And as a director too, especially because I do a lot of queer works and I do a lot of things that deal with that. Like I remember in college, I got to direct a show called Slipping by Daniel Talbot, an incredible show. There's a lot of graphic sex and violence and nudity and there's stuff in it.
Mm.
And it's all very poignant to me. So it was all very smartly placed and really talks about like what it means to be queer and to be dealing with loss and grief and then sexuality. And so one of the actors was very athletic looking, very like kind of a sculpted body, like just a very beautiful man in the common sense. And then there was another one who was also very handsome, but was a little more rounded, you know. And then the third gentleman in the show was sort of leaner. And so the three bodies in the show, I thought were really representative of what is actually queer, you know, like what's actually happening, where you do have the sort of jocks that love to go to the gym bunnies and they do all that, and then you have kind of the normal bodied, and he, you know, he wasn't big by any means, but you know, he wasn't sculpted. It's
like average body.
Yeah, and he's still handsome and lovely, and his performance is beautiful. And then the other one, my friend Ethan, who's Asian, was sort of very lean but I just remember thinking, like, not thinking anything of it until we get to like the nude scenes and audiences coming in and people going like, oh, I think I expected more, you know, like of the jockey kind of thing. But then we're seeing like real people doing real things. And I just love that. And I think I'm more intentional about it now, where I sort of look for that. I look for who's telling the most compelling story. Right. Just how you were saying in casting, like I'm looking for who's pushed through the rejection they've already given themselves to actually come into the room and play ball with me and really hit this character and really play with the story. But I wish there was more. I wish there was a way for me to reach out and go, come to the theater. Yes. Come be a part of it, because there's a space for you with me. Yeah. And I feel like the more people that encourage that and the more people we can see in the media, the more successful it's going to be.
I agree.
Any final thoughts?
This just didn't go where I thought it was going to, but it was really cool.
Oh, thanks. Me too.
I love this. I love these conversations.
Thank you. Me too. So this is Emily Richmond and Shea King. Thanks for checking into Podspell.
Next time, can we record about actual witchcraft?
Yeah, next time we're going to talk about witchcraft and probably more fat bodies.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah.
So thanks all for checking in. Remember, create for the good of creating.
You have been listening to a podcast produced by Wolf and Thunder Productions. Visit our website at wolfandthunder.com and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/wolfandthunder.